So if you're revising for paper two, macroeconomics for AQA, I think paper one went quite well, and I think there was a question for everyone for every topic. Multiple questions on market failure and government intervention, a couple of questions relating to market structures or privatization, um, questions about the labor market. So I think similarly with paper two, hopefully if things go well, you'll have options for different areas. And paper one and two is really testing you about depth of knowledge rather than knowing every single thing. So ideally, you do know about most things, but if you're revising last minute, I would focus on your favorite topics in detail and hope a question does come up on that. I break it down into the year 12 side of macro, which is basically um, the conflicts between the four objectives and why it's difficult to achieve all of them. So basically, economic growth leads to inflation, low unemployment leads to inflation, and a current account surplus might lead to inflation as well. However, also knowing a paragraph in detail about why it can be possible to achieve all four macroeconomic objectives, basically through supply side policies. Um, how fiscal policy can be useful when we're in a recession, as well as really good evaluation for this. How monetary policy can be useful in a recession, as well as really good evaluation for this. When and how supply side policies are useful. So when you're in a positive output gap or in a boom or when inflation is starting to get quite high, it would be useful to use supply side policies. Um, um, and also why fiscal and monetary policy could be useful to control high inflation. So maybe contractionary fiscal policy and contractionary monetary policy, and the evaluation, for example, how contractionary fiscal policy would lead to you cutting spending on health and education and how this might cause inequality. Also on the end part of the spec, I would say make sure you know the best policies to increase economic development because if it doesn't come up on Monday, it would come up in paper three. So you've got various policies like increased spending on health and education, which is an interventionist supply side policy. You've got lowering corporation taxes, lowering income taxes, privatization, which are market-based supply side policies. Um, and you've also got other things like controlling your exchange rate or protectionism. And then in terms of trade, I'd know the dangers of a current account deficit as well as the other side of it in terms of why a current account deficit is not that bad. Um, I definitely know my pick your three favorite policies to write about in terms of how to reduce the current account deficit. So, for example, one would be supply side policies, another might be protectionism, and another might be a weak exchange rate or contractionary demand side policies. I would definitely know one really good paragraph in favor of protectionism and another paragraph in favor of free trade, because that could also be used in the context of an argument for globalization and against globalization. And on that note, I would definitely know the tariff diagram in detail if you're doing AQA, and maybe other diagrams such as quotas if you're doing other examples. This one's a bit more niche, but it's also worth understanding to be fair, especially a floating exchange rate and how that works. And if you have time, I would go into a fixed exchange rate and understand the differences and the reasons for them and how they could be useful. Um, I haven't put any financial markets in, and ideally I would know about financial markets, but if we're just going through the most important stuff, it would be this. For example, if we look at last year's paper, we've got stuff like um, has globalization been beneficial for the UK? And then in 2022, we had, has international trade always, does international trade always benefit nations? And this kind of question does come up a lot. And if it's not worded the same, you're still going to be able to reuse the paragraphs. So I'd basically go through this list and make sure you could write really, really solid paragraphs on all of them, and focus on the ones which you don't know how to write. And then at the end, I'd go through the list of questions, which is over here, and just look at challenging ones and see where you wouldn't know what to write about. And then if you have even more time, I would then go through all the 15 markers and make sure you could write chains of reasoning for those as well. Niche questions like quantitative easing, if it came up last year, it's potentially less likely to come up, but we saw privatization came up last year in micro, and it kind of came up again in terms of energy this year. Um, Lastly, in terms of diagrams, I would make sure I know everything about SRAS, AD, LRAS, and the curved Keynesian SAS curve. And then in terms of year 13, I would know exchange rates, supply and demand diagram, and most importantly, a tariff diagram, and then maybe a PPF curve for comparative advantage. If there's anything that's hard on here and I don't have a video for, then please do ask in the comments, and please do leave a like and share my video. Um, if you have problems with any of these, it's likely that I have a video, especially on this stuff, in my macro playlist.